Hello, and thank you very much for joining us. My name's Ian Stroud.
And my name is David Malone, and this is Hyperland.
Hello, David.
Hello, Maisie.
How are you?
I'm all right. I'm feeling quite excited by today.
Oh, go on.
We've got Professor Sunetra Gupta joining us. We had hoped we would get Sunetra on ages ago, and she finally agreed.
Well, we did. Our second podcast ever was about bird flu.
It was, and I said back then, we must get Sunetra on, and I'm nothing
here.
if not persistent. So Professor Sunetra Gupta, she's Oxford University. She's a world-renowned epidemiologist and also a vaccine researcher working on a bird flu vaccine. Sunetra, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Should we talk about bird flu?
Yes, why not?
So look, this bird flu has been cropping up in the news with, well, you might say alarming frequency. And it does seem to be spreading from birds to mammals, more mammals. And then recently there was this death in Mexico.
Mexico, yeah.
And it was in cows. What does all of this mean, Sunetra? Because people seem to have very different opinions about whether this means the end of the world or nothing at all. What should people believe about this?
So I've been working on human and other types of flus for a long time. And, about 20 years ago, or slightly longer than that, there was a similar kind of worry concerning avian flu spreading into the same sort of things, highly pathogenic flu spreading into humans and causing a major pandemic. Influenza is a complex beast in that it resides in various species, birds, of course, swine, cows now it seems as well. So it's able to infect a large number of different species and transfer between them. And some of the flus that we have circulating, for example, the human influenza virus of a particular subtype 1, that currently circulates, derives from a lineage that came in 2009, which came in from swine. And swine are they're mixing vessels for different types of flus. And what happens there is different flus come in and they reassort and reassemble and come out looking slightly different. And then they cause what we call pandemics because they disseminate globally.
Right. Yeah. Is that because in the pig can get infected, if I got this right, it can get infected with its own flu virus, bird flu virus and human? Is that right?
That's right. So it's serving as a sort of mixing vessel. So that's happening at a particular sort of macroscopic level, if you like. But as such, within each species, there is actually a dynamic that's maintained with some of these incursions, which can sometimes cause what we call a lineage change. But as such, what happens within each species is that you have this sort of regular rhythm whereby flu strains change, which is why at the moment you need a vaccine the vaccine that we have needs updating regularly. So I've worked on these systems for a while now, and I have a particular theory of how this all works.
Oh, good. Tell us.
Which is somewhat different to the sort of prevailing, the orthodoxy. So first I should explain what the orthodoxy is. The orthodoxy envisages influenza as having this sort of, in every species, as having this sort of unlimited capacity to change. And therefore that means we have to remain on tenterhooks for what it might become next. About more than 15 years ago, we published a paper challenging that idea. One way to describe, I use an analogy for our model, or my model, which I'll wheel out at the risk of having too many metaphors here mixing. But essentially, you can think of influenza as having a wardrobe in which each element of the wardrobe is something that's presented to the immune system, or that we recognize.
Yeah.
Or
Right, the outside
the
of
bird
it, you mean?
recognize. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And once we recognize it, we have the ability to shoot down something that's wearing the same cap, let's say. And the conventional wisdom is that influenza has an almost unlimited wardrobe in humans and birds and swine, etc. We challenged that idea by saying that actually most of the elements of influenza's wardrobe are actually quite constrained.
Across species? Oh, okay.
In every species, you only have 5 jackets,
Wow. Okay.
3 pairs of shoes. Obviously, with even 5 jackets and 4 skirts and 3 pairs of shoes and 5 hats, you can assemble an outfit that looks different each time.
Yeah.
But
it's not unlimited.
It's not unlimited. This is the basis, just a little segue here, of the vaccine that we're developing.
Right.
So we have gone on to actually prove that this is correct for human influenza.
Yeah.
And that's the vaccine we're trying to develop, and we've, patented this now and licensed it. So it's something that we've put a lot of work into. So it's not just an idea. It started off as an idea. It started off as a mathematical model, but now it is something that's very much in translation.
Oh.
Okay, so if that's the core idea, that any virus population, whether it's in birds or humans or in swine, is basically trying to scramble to find the right outfit at every moment in time, that puts a whole new puts everything into perspective, or a particular perspective. What that means is that you have this continuous reshuffling of different parts of the outfit, of different fashions in these different species. They come and go. So with a certain regularity, you will see a pathogenic strain of, let's say, H5N1 bird flu, which is what we're worried about now. A pathogenic strain will emerge, and then it will naturally die out.
Mm-hmm.
In that period when it is circulating, it does have the capacity to infect other species, humans, and it appears cows, and I think there was a dog. So it will jump across, but it doesn't typically tend to spread within this other species. It simply jumps across.
Right.
When it jumps across, it can cause severe disease, and in the last avian pandemic that we saw, there were some deaths. But these are typically in people who are what we call immune naive, so very young children or immunosenescent people, elderly people.
Right.
They can be badly affected by these transfers. Overall, I think, is it something to worry about? Not at the level of, oh my God, is this going to cause a new pandemic?
That's a bit shocking.
Because I think we have a lot of cross protection from, at least against severe disease and death, just by our continuous exposure to any kind of flu.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to fear that it will cause massive pandemic, in the sense of, even if it spreads, I don't think the death toll will be high in the way that the 1918 flu was.
Yeah.
Why not, though, Sunetra? Because, I mean, in 1918 it was serious. Why wouldn't it be this time?
I was hoping you'd ask that question. I was just going to say, well, I don't want to explain that. So, what happened in 1918, and this is speculation, I think, is that before 1918, if you look at the history of flu or flu-like illness, you see this pattern whereby it appears every 30 years or so and causes a lot of death. And then it kind of dies away. And what people had assumed was that in between those pandemics, in those interpandemic periods, that it was still circulating. But I think because of the way populations were structured and the lack of travel, the demographic conditions 100 years ago up to 100 years ago, didn't really permit flu to carry on circulating. So it would come in, die out, and then for 30 years there'd be no flu at all. Then it would come in again.
Right.
What does that mean? It means in those 30 years, you'd build up a population who had never, under the age of 30, who had never had flu at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened in 1918, is that we know there was a pandemic in 1890. Winston Churchill wrote a poem about it, and we know there was considerable, pretty high death toll. Then between 1890 and 1918, if you look at the records, you see reports of so-and-so having died of flu, but they're simply someone putting influenza on a death certificate. There's no actual indication that there was sustained transmission of flu as there is now. Mm-hmm. So I think the most parsimonious explanation for what happened in 1918 is that influenza arrived in a population where people under 30, this was their first encounter.
Yeah.
And the first encounter is always dangerous.
Yeah.
But now fortunately for us, we are regularly exposed to influenza and indeed to other coronaviruses, which is why I think the recent SARS-CoV-2 pandemic also, it could have had a much worse impact if we had been naive to coronavirus. So we're in a different setting now where we have a lot of cross-immunity with other related viruses. So paradoxically, we're protected by the fact that we have a lot more interaction with the rest of the world.
And of course, we have larger travel hubs now as well, so there will be more chances of carrying the disease around.
Exactly. So we have the spread of, a continual influx of new strains, and we're just now we're connected. So it's a sort of global ecosystem within which these viruses play out.
I read the one in Mexico. I had it was described as H5N2.
Which
it was
there was a very recent H5N2.
Yeah, I thought it was the one
that popped up.
Yeah, I thought it was the one in Mexico that jumped from the cattle to the man who died from it. Although he had other, it reported that he had other illnesses as well.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking of an H1N2 that came up a few months ago.
Right.
I mean, the N is just it's just another antigen.
Yeah.
The H is the bit that would contain the
Is H the wardrobe?
Properties. So the wardrobe is actually bits of H. So H is a molecule, hemagglutinin, which sticks out of the surface of the virus.
Like a spike.
And it's what the virus uses to attach to a host cell.
Right.
In the same way that the spike protein in SARS-CoV-2 was what the virus used to attach.
Yeah.
So these are the bits that are sticking out of the virus.
Yeah.
And so they're very exposed to the immune system.
Yeah.
But the immune system doesn't see the whole protein. It sees little bits of it. So those little bits are the parts of the wardrobe. But N, which stands for neuraminidase, is another protein.
Yeah.
Its role is to allow the virus to escape from the cell once it's made inside the cell.
Yeah.
That too will have its own little wardrobe. But H1 is, or H, hemagglutinin is the protein that we mainly target with antibodies.
Yeah.
And it's those antibodies that stop the virus from entering the cell at all.
Yeah.
So with a vaccine, that's a good target.
Yeah.
Why has or is it true? Because it appears that the bird flu virus has been increasing its ability to jump from one species to another, from birds to various mammals like tigers and seals and dogs and cats, and now cows. Is it in some ways correct to say that its evolution is somehow accelerating, or is that just because we're noticing it more?
I suspect it's the latter. I wouldn't really, we don't have enough data to answer that question. But I imagine that it's just that we are now able to detect it.
Right.
Because most of these cases are asymptomatic, of course.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, do you think that flu was in cows before and we just didn't know? Or do you think this is the first time that flu has jumped into cows?
I honestly do not know the answer to that. So it may well have developed at this point a particular
strain
mutation or something about ability to, but I'd be surprised if it had never ever before explored that possibility. So, if you think of a virus as sort of interrogating its antigenic space or its ability, a kind of phenotypic space. I think the dogma is that it does so sporadically, but that doesn't fit with the fact that viruses mutate very rapidly.
Yes,
so
true.
Our conception of how viruses are evolving is that they are interrogating these spaces regularly, but a lot of the time it just doesn't work because either there is already some host immunity or you need a very specific set of mutations to be able to jump from one species to another. But I imagine if I had to guess, I would say this is just going to die out. I mean, it will get some infections in cows, and then I would be very surprised if it became endemic in cows.
Really? Okay.
But one never knows.
So then, what do you say to people who say, look, as it's moving from birds to mammals, that it may pick up the bits of mammalian genetic code that it needs in order to become more infectious for humans? Is that true, or is that one of these things which appears in the newspapers but isn't actually true?
No, that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Interesting.
As I said, essentially, I don't see the virus as sort of slowly ambling along, picking up mutations. I see it as madly dashing around, trying everything, and then finding something that fits or something that suddenly works.
Right.
And whether what suddenly works depends very much on the previous history of exposure of those populations.
Got you. So, I mean, if we apply that, what you've just said, your way of looking at that, to the last pandemic, the COVID one, which is, of course, it's what happened then, or what we've been told happened then, which gives that the picture that everyone uses to imagine what will happen in the next one, or what might happen with bird flu. Is our understanding of the COVID story out of whack as well? Because the story is it was in bats, and then it picked up what it needed from pangolins or something, and then it was able to jump to us.
I think that that's the most likely explanation, that it was in bats, and I think these viruses are continuously emerging and probably dying out because we have quite a lot of cross immunity due to exposure to other coronaviruses. So I see the coronavirus sort of population, or the family of coronaviruses, as containing several types of viruses, and also being in a constant state of flux. And so every now and then something will emerge which has the capability of transmitting to humans and then transmitting from human to human. But it probably just fizzles out because we have quite a lot of immunity from the other coronaviruses. And so it doesn't really gain a foothold. And then every now and then it will, such as this one did. So my idea of what happened with SARS-CoV-2, which seems to not be in agreement with either camps, and I think camp is the right word given how toxic that debate has become.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. I think the most, again, parsimonious explanation is that it jumped out of a bat somewhere in probably southern China or wherever there's bats.
Down in Yunnan, basically, yes.
And then it was slowly spreading. And then was eventually detected in Wuhan, but it had been spreading for a while before that. I find it odd that people assume that it originated in Wuhan just because it was first detected in Wuhan.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think this fixation with, it came from Wuhan, therefore it must have come out of a lab or the wet market. Well, I find it mystifying.
Do you? Right. I mean, we made that film talked to quite a lot of people, and we didn't come to any conclusion because we didn't have enough information, but it seemed like it was an open discussion whether it was a natural origin or whether it was a result of some escaped gain of function. But you think it's less likely to be that?
I guess I should, what I should qualify what I said. I think it's odd that people assume that it must have originated in Wuhan. Now, just because they picked up the case in Wuhan.
Yes.
I agree that, there are lots of, that it's an open argument. Could it have come from a lab? I imagine it might. That there's a possibility. I find it difficult to believe that you could make a virus in a lab that would actually have this potential to spread, but it's entirely possible.
Yeah.
And I think it should be discussed and argued over in a respectful scientific way, rather than the sort of mudslinging that you're forced to spectate upon, which is really unfortunate.
Why did that happen? I mean, that's the bit that mystifies me, is why it wasn't discussed openly in a scientific way, but right from the start was made, well, it was just shut down right from the start. Why? Do you have any notion? It was shut down.
Okay, so I think it was shut down for the same reasons as I and other colleagues were shut down for being anti-lockdown. The current sort of scientific, the culture is one where people seek consensus, and when you go against the consensus, you are severely punished.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of broader reason why I think it was shut down, and I think it was disgraceful the way it was shut down and the way the proponents of the lab leak theory were treated. That was unacceptable. But what I think, why did that happen is, at a broad level, because that's what scientists do these days. They kind of close ranks and say, okay, we're right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Why did they do that, though? It didn't used to be that way. I mean, even...
Well, it's become like that. Well, I can go into a whole sort of thing about how neoliberalism. At the core of all this is the neoliberalization of science, of university education and research.
What do you mean by that, Sunetra? Tell me what you mean by that.
I think, okay, I'll tell you that and then I'll go back to the specifics. I think what's happened is that there's been a change in the culture in which, we're seen as part of a system in which we have to produce, we have to get grants, we have to produce, we have to make products that are suitable for immediate consumption by students and the general public. So that whole kind of way of framing what research and education is about, I think, promotes the growth of these kind of networks where you have to support each other in order to survive.
It's a nonsense.
And I really have...
It's a nonsense, though, isn't it?
I think it's very detrimental to everything. And I think that is the cause of many of the ills that we have now. And I think this is an example where I imagine, and because I know many of the people who were involved in originally reacting to the lab leak idea, and even though some of them continue to actively defame us, I would like to still believe that what they were trying to do at the time was really to try and damp things down, because there is a strong potential for this idea that it was a lab leak from China to blow up into horrible, sort of catastrophic kind of mess. Well, it could acquire dimensions that you really wouldn't want it to have, of people being, accusing China of deliberately releasing the oil. I mean, it just becomes very messy.
Yeah.
So I think I can see why they tried to keep that under control, but then it kind of morphed into a situation where they were just closing ranks. And
well, they definitely
desperately
were.
Desperately looking for alternative explanations, and talking about raccoon dogs playing mahjong in wet markets.
Yes, with a few pangolins thrown in for good measure.
Yeah, a bowl of pangolin chop suey and that sort of thing. I mean, so it just doesn't. I think neither explanation is or worth defending to that extent.
Yeah.
I think you could say it might have come out of a wet market, might have come out of the lab, it might have come out of the lab because samples were bought, bat samples were continuously being bought to the lab. I mean, there's a range of possibilities. Each one should be considered on its own merit, and I don't understand why it's become this kind of obsession, really. And I find it quite difficult, actually, to also read the lab leak side of it and how they are utterly convinced that this was something that was being covered up. And I think the gain of function, the obsession with gain of function is also completely misplaced.
Is it?
Gain of function is just gain of function research. I think is simply, one has to, in order to understand how viruses work, you do mutate them. Yeah. Typically, they lose function when they mutate, and so they may gain one type of function. So, for example, the virus that Ron Fouchier produced, which was an H5 that was capable of transmitting from ferret to ferret, it might have gained that function, but it had lost so many other functions down along the route, on that route. At the time, particularly, I said I really didn't see how a virus like that would be able to compete with wild-type viruses. And that's the fundamental point. I think that you can make stuff in the lab. It's pretty difficult to make something that even works, let alone can compete with something in the wild. Yeah. So I just think this sort of fixation on gain of function is misplaced. I also think that the idea that stopping gain of function will prevent pandemics from occurring
that's obviously wrong, because we had pandemics before we had gain of function. So I mean,
no, exactly. It's
that one fails before it starts.
Quite. But, I think I think that we should continue to debate and argue about where it came from, because it's interesting and it's illuminating, and there are interesting sides to both the arguments. But I think to jump on it as a way of dealing with future pandemics is, as you just said, doesn't really make any sense.
Well, hold on a sec. I mean, it doesn't make sense, and it makes no sense to say if we don't have gain of function, we won't have any more pandemics, because obviously we had a pandemic in 1918 and no one was doing any gain of function back then. But is it possible that gain of function could lead to further outbreaks which might not have occurred in the general course of a world where no one was doing gain of function? In other words, does it add something? But
that's the right way to that is the right way to ask the question, rather than what I just said. And I think the chances are very low. Having said that, obviously you'd want them conducted in facilities with the proper sort of biosecurity measures in place. And so, yes, we also don't want them conducted in a lab that someone describes as the Wild West.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't want that, but these things are fairly obvious. But to ban gain of function, whatever that means, It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it precisely mean?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, in some way, given what you're saying, and I think it's a very interesting saying that, the Fouché experiment, his gain of function, okay, it did give it the ability to transmit in the air between ferrets. But you're saying, yes, but it may have lost or did lose, I don't know, all sorts of other things along the way. I've not heard anyone say that before. But in a way, then it's people like Fouché who have caused the problem, because him and the Japanese researcher, Japanese-American, I can't remember his name now.
Yeah.
At the time, they would say things in public like, we've just done the most dangerous experiment that's ever been done. And if this virus escaped, it could be catastrophic. And you think, well, then that's what people have thought gain of function was about.
Well, once again, if you're forced to sell yourself, if this is an invasion of the market into the temple.
Okay. So they were talking it up because they thought it made them
celebrity scientists.
And more than that, you write in your grant application that I've done this, and this needs that. Then you're more likely to get your next grant.
Yeah.
Or it's. I think scientists need to not do that.
Yes.
And
maybe they also shouldn't, talking about things scientists shouldn't do. I mean, what you were saying about, it could have blown up to be something unpleasant. Well, of course it could. But from a personal point of view, I don't really like some scientists who I've never met. They've not been to my house for dinner, taking it upon themselves to decide, we must not allow this to be said. We don't want Mr. Malone to hear this because we suspect that he's so feeble-minded, this will cause him to become violently racist against Chinese people. So we must protect him from himself.
I agree.
Who asked the scientists to do this? Why do they think they're so damn clever that they should elect themselves as my protector? I don't need Mr. Farrar to protect me.
Well, Mr. Farrar's definitely been to my house for dinner.
He's not been to mine.
and Mr. Farrar did not hesitate to also condemn my criticisms of lockdown in terms that were really defamatory.
They were. You were treated horribly
by someone like Jeremy, who's a very good, I thought of as a very good friend and a collaborator.
Yeah.
Meaning that, he could have picked up the phone to me and said, I'm not quite sure what your thoughts are on this, and I don't understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Could you explain
we
it?
We should explain what this whole business is, because you were treated so abominably that it's not something I wanted to raise in case you thought I don't want to have to go through that again, but you have raised it. So what was it that you said that people like Farrar and certain parts of the tabloid press, well, not just the tabloid press, well, if you include the Guardian,
media,
the Guardian is the thinking man's. I would regard the Guardian as the Daily Mail with slightly longer words.
Quite. Essentially, okay, so one of the reasons I'm also less slightly dismayed by the attention given to the lab leaks theory is because I think the bigger problem that we really need to grapple with here is, what do we do when a pandemic occurs? Because that's what we've faced and failed miserably at in the last 4 years. So when this pandemic happened, my thoughts were, of course, in terms of what the virus would do, were very much structured along the lines of what we've just been talking about, because these general principles apply to coronaviruses as well. So my feeling was, this is going to spread, that there will be vulnerable groups who will be badly affected. We can already see that.
Yeah.
But rather than trying to stop it from spreading, because that was something we had never tried before, and to my mind, it was not necessarily likely to work, that what we should do is try and protect those who are vulnerable, mainly because the costs of trying to stop the spread, which in any case we didn't know whether we would be able to do, or indeed why we were doing it, that the costs of trying to do that were really high. So the collateral damage of lockdowns and other such non-pharmaceutical interventions was extremely high, particularly in the global south, particularly for the poorer parts of the population, and very much for the young. So what I advocated, and some others, was that we should institute a policy, or just carry on with the established policy of trying to reduce the risk of infection among the vulnerable.
Yeah.
And certainly, of course, go about trying to develop a vaccine to protect them eventually. But that we should not attempt to stop the spread within the general population, because that also had the added benefit that we would reach what we call herd immunity, in which a proportion of the population would be immune, which thereby reducing the risk to the vulnerable pool. It's what pandemic policies were up to that point. So it wasn't something that we proudly came up with. It was just saying, let's go back to what we used to do.
Yeah, I saw the lockdown in slightly. I didn't think it was going to stop the spread so much as control the number of people that were getting infected, and therefore allow them to be seen by the NHS at the time. I mean, that was kind of what we were trying to do. The message was coming across as protecting the NHS.
No, you could. Yes, what you're saying is what should have happened, but it should have happened. That process of slowing down infection should have been confined to those who would actually need to go to hospital because they were infected, not the whole population.
Yes, no, I see that. It's actually 4 years today that my father died of COVID, so yeah, it's great.
No, exactly. And two of my favorite cousins in India in their 70s died of COVID.
Yeah.
They both had comorbidities, but they should have got vaccinated.
Yeah.
Before I did, and that didn't happen. So, I mean, we failed on protecting those who are vulnerable, and focused too much on protecting those who were just too scared to be exposed, and whose livelihoods were not going to be affected by being in lockdown.
So we failed to protect the most vulnerable, and then we saddled those who needn't have been protected with an immense cost that they needn't have borne, i.e. the global south, everyone who desperately needed to work, and all the kids who lost out on 2 years of education.
Exactly.
But I mean, the other part of that, which is always, I should be polite and just say puzzled, although the word I'd like to use is a lot stronger, on this business of locking down, because on the one hand, we had this message, we must lock everyone down in their house. There must be no travel on trains, no travel on buses, no travel on cars. You can't even go for a walk. And yet, the very same people who were saying that said, but what we must not do is stop international air travel. And so you had, in the lockdown year, 17 million passenger journeys through Heathrow. In the same year, I wasn't allowed to go to the shops.
No.
Now, how does that work?
It was a complete collapse of,
But it's the same
logic.
People. So what is going on?
It was a complete collapse of logic. I mean, there was, and it's obvious, and if you just scan the images from the time, there was a contradiction in almost every sphere of what was actually protecting the individual.
But then, Sunetra, who were these idiots? And why did anyone allow them to be in charge? I mean, it seems like we had Bill and Ben in charge. But Bill and Ben with PhDs,
Well, exactly. Well, we know who was in charge. I won't specifically mention. And we know why they just went ahead and did whatever came into their heads.
So
and there was a complete narrative collapse at that point.
So, Sunetra, how is the vaccine on bird flu going?
So, yes, first of all, I should mention my vaccine is actually on human flu.
Human, right?
Although it may well protect against bird flu, but we'll see. So, at the moment, the human flu vaccine we have is one that you have to take every year, as you know. Fortunately, it's not offered to absolutely everybody, and because it doesn't do a very good job of protecting you at the moment, and such protection as it offers wanes very quickly with time as the strains change.
Yeah.
The idea here is that, if we go back to the wardrobe analogy, is that influenza in any given season, all the viruses are wearing the same outfit.
Right.
And therefore you can make a vaccine that targets that particular outfit.
So if it's winter flu, they're all wearing scarves and hats.
They're all wearing a red hat, a red scarf, a red jacket, and a red pair of trousers and red shoes.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can make a vaccine that you take the red strain and you grow it in chicken embryo blasts, blah, 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 and you attenuate it and then you stick it in someone's arm, or you kill it. Actually, it's the main vaccine. You kill it and stick it in someone's arm, or you attenuate it and shove it up someone's nose. That's how it works at the moment.
Yeah.
But then it has to be updated every few years, when what happens suddenly is that the influenza virus comes out wearing a green outfit. So the fact that it does this, that it changes suddenly from a red outfit to a green outfit and then to a blue outfit, is what prompted us to try and investigate this through a mathematical model and come up with this evolutionary model that shows you how this could actually happen.
And
because the conundrum...
This is targeting the hemagglutinin.
Yes, so if you think of the hemagglutinin as being an outfit in which each element of the hemagglutinin is one of these parts of the outfit, a hat or a scarf or whatever. The conundrum here is that if influenza does have this really unlimited wardrobe, how is it that in a particular season they're all coordinated and wearing the same outfit? It actually does not make sense. You cannot verbally. It seems quite reasonable.
Yeah.
Oh yes, influenza mutates and becomes different. But actually, given that we have a large virus population which is mutating like mad, it doesn't make sense. So that's why we came...
Hold on, I've got the answer. Obviously, there is in viruses a fashion week, a sort of Paris fashion week, until someone comes out with red. They go,
season,
red.
Yes.
Red is the new green. We must all wear
red is the new green.
I see. So you should have had me on the team earlier. I'd have sorted this out for you, Sunetra.
I think it's a good sort of metaphor in some ways for our solution, which is that what happens is after a while, what influenza is trying to do, as in a fashion show, is come up with something novel.
Yeah.
Something that people haven't seen in a while.
Oh, right. Okay.
So green outfit not having been around for a long time means, let's
try
green
this
outfit.
again. Yeah.
You look marvellous, darling, marvellous.
Exactly. And that is, exactly what happened, I'm proud to say, in 2009, which was 2 years after we published our paper.
Yeah.
So we anticipated it, if you like. The flu that came, the new flu pandemic in 2009, was wearing the blue outfit, the very same blue outfit it wore in 1918.
Wow.
Ah, right.
And elderly people who had been around in 1918 and that time, during that period, actually had very good neutralizing antibodies against this
over that period of
apparently
time.
New virus.
God.
So that fashion show is exactly the
That's amazing.
analogy.
So never throw away your old fashion. Just hang on to it. It'll come back into fashion.
It will come back into fashion. And that's what flu, in fact, is obliged to do that because it only has. So what we've been able to show is it only has 4 jackets.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's going to have to go back to that jacket that it discarded in 1933.
Yeah.
So then the challenge, so that was in 2007, 2009. then the challenge was to find these jackets or find these elements, which we did. And so we've now, so what the idea then is to have a vaccine that only has those 4 jackets. But once we've gained the measure of those 4 jackets, we are not going to be taken aback by anything that flu can do next. So that's the idea behind the vaccine. We've found the jackets, we've patented them, and now we're trying to
sort the scarves and hats.
Make them. We're trying to find a dummy, actually, that will wear the jackets.
You've got one here.
The right combination.
But that makes perfect sense. So instead of throwing your hands up and saying it could be an infinite number of variations, you're going, but they'll all be wearing one of 4 jackets.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's clever. That's a piece of cleverness. Right.
Well, I hope it actually works. But even if it doesn't, it was fun. It was fun trying.
In terms of the way that you look at vaccines, I know nothing at all, as I'm about to prove. So you're targeting the hemagglutinin that attaches itself to us. What about the N? I'll let you say it. Is there any way of attacking or having protection?
Yes, you can do the same thing with N. I suspect N has an even more limited wardrobe.
Right.
But the point is, there's only so much you can pack into a vaccine.
Right. Okay.
So you can't put everything in there. So what you'd be looking to do is just focus the response on the jackets of H. So then you're covered.
So then it wouldn't matter how dangerous the virus was inside. It would be like being a very dangerous person trying to get into a nightclub, but your name's not on the list, so you can't come in.
Yes, exactly.
You're wearing the wrong outfit.
You're wearing a pink T-shirt.
I don't care if your name is Al Capone. You're not coming in with that jacket. That's excellent.
So
I like this. I like it a lot. That's excellent. But is this all of this unpleasantness we've talked about? Is this going to go away? Or is science going to get drawn further into this? Or are sensible scientists going to tell the Faucis and Farrars and all the people who signed the proximal origin letter to go away? Because they seem to be in the ascendant, and I think what they're doing to science is horribly detrimental, because whether people's reactions are correct or not, they have incubated a deep distrust of science. And you can't say to people, oh, you're being illogical, you're being terrible. Given that they have been lied to, it's not illogical to think this person's a liar. I'm not going to believe them the next time either.
Exactly. I think they made a grave error in being so in the way they handled this. And are they going to change, or is the current generation of scientists in charge, are they going to change? I don't think so. Establishment is establishment. The establishment is behind them. The Royal Society is behind them.
Yeah.
The Royal Society has not put on any debates about any of these issues. That's what, when I was a student.
That's true, isn't it, Sunetra? Yes, I hadn't thought about that. There's been a deafening silence.
That was,
Exactly.
was the last one around the AIDS, and the chap who wrote the book about the river.
Yes.
That's right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah, exactly. That was, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Even what I thought was a bit of a wacky idea around that time, they did the absolute right thing, which was let's have a scientific discussion meeting.
Yeah.
And let's respectfully and with decorum discuss this. And that's what I was used to. And I think we need to bring back that atmosphere and culture.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think it's going to take a generation for that to change.
Do you really think it's that bad? I mean,
yes, I do.
It's
difficult right now to navigate in this
But do they not? Does the Royal Society not understand the fairly simple arguments that we've been making? It's not like we've used tremendously long words. They're sort of self-evident
I think
discussions.
The problem is, who is the Royal Society now? The Royal Society now are the fellows in it, and they have selected each other to reinforce their own opinions. So they're not going to want me to, they would actively prevent me from being platformed, I think would be fair to say.
That's ridiculous. I mean, that's unscientific. I mean, if we take that back to Einstein's time, everyone would have said, well, we all know that signals have to travel through a medium. We all know this. All waves have to travel through a medium. So they would have shut Einstein out and said, well, you can't have that. I mean, who are you? You're just a patent clerk in Switzerland.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I mean, I remember The Guardian, Sonia Soda writing about the Great Barrington Declaration, which was myself and Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff sort of trying to get across the idea that lockdowns perhaps weren't the right way forward. Yeah. She accused us of having a Galileo complex.
What? I missed that one. Who is this numpty? Who is this person we're talking about?
She's a Guardian
writer,
journalist in The Guardian. But I don't know. I think somehow the pandemic brought out the worst in everyone.
Yeah.
It did.
Except us, of course.
It brought out some bad things in me, I can't tell you how.
So, Netra, can I ask another question? What do you think of the WHO?
Okay, that's another. I mean, I do find myself right now feeling sort of at odds with almost all
everyone
constituencies.
I'm
so I think that the sort of jumping up and down about how the WHO are trying to take over the world is also really rather silly.
Yeah.
The WHO have, they behaved badly. I mean, I think they did not, just acquit themselves.
Well, not just
over the pandemic.
Yeah, not just the pandemic. I mean, we did a podcast with Susie Greaves about Chernobyl and how there were misinformation.
I'm sure there are a lot of issues. It depends on who's controlling what in terms of narratives, and they are very susceptible to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they also do some very, very important things. And it's essential that we have such a body. What we need to do is we need to try and reform it.
Yeah.
It should not be paid for by, it should not be at the mercy of what is now called philanthrocapitalism.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I like that word. I do.
Hello, Mr. Gates. Come in, Mr. Gates. I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you. You're breaking up.
So, I don't think it should be. I mean, I think we need to reform it.
Yeah.
But jumping up and down and saying, "Oh my God, look, they're, out to try and take over the world, and we need to completely shut them down or put them all in jail." I don't understand. I actually don't understand this whole sort of.
Oh, no, I think I understand it. I do understand it. I don't agree with it, but I think that sort of we must rein in the WHO has been a somewhat misguided, but I think understandable reaction to the appalling supine reaction that they had to COVID. I mean, they seemed to be, because they were entirely bought and sold. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to say,
it's not.
Get rid of them. Who are these numpties?
Most of these people have been extremely unkind to me personally, actually. So, I mean, so all I'm saying is that if I can separate myself from that and just say, well, let's look at what they actually, how can we turn this into a positive situation rather than just a rant.
You're the bigger person then.
I mean, I don't know about that. I just think that there's not much to be gained from just having a rant about.
Oh, it's very cathartic, though, Sunetra. Come on.
No,
I agree with you.
We can go a rant in the pub or whatever it is fine, but not on the pages of.
So it's the journalists,
Times, or indeed on Twitter. I mean, it's just this sort of pervasive kind of desire to, I don't know, just. I think vilifying individuals particularly is really not helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm tired of it. I feel kind of exhausted by it, is what I'm saying. I'd like to go back. I don't think this is being a bigger person. I think it's just I just like decorum. It's how I want to live. I like decorum. I like sleeping at night.
Yeah.
It's all very selfish, really. That's how I want to live.
Yeah, no, it was how I was brought up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've got to just go back a little bit to, I don't know how long ago it was. Why Are We Here? And I've got to thank you for introducing me to, I'm going to say this wrong, Duino-Elegies.
Oh yes,
yes. After watching your interview with that, I bought the book.
That's wonderful.
It was a lovely
2 years ago. We went to Rhondda.
Yeah.
Again, and it was wonderful being there. And that's where the 6th elegy was written.
Right.
And you can really visiting the places that and the Duino Castle itself just gives you a sense of the sensibilities that were involved.
Immersing yourself in it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's what I want to do with my life. I don't want to be ranting about the document.
Okay, all right. The last tiny bit of rant. I missed the rant in this, so I just want to get.
Okay.
Is that what happened to Nature and Science and Scientific American? What happened to those journals? Because I had always thought, obviously in my naivete, that they were not cut from the same cloth as rags like the Guardian. That they did have some deep moral duty that they themselves felt to report things properly, to have a proper debate.
How
what
they
happened?
were. Yes, I think that is how they were, and they had strong editors and people who enjoyed engaging with scientists and actually performing that real role of editing and challenging, and they enjoyed that and gained from that, as did editors and literary editors actually, or publishers of literature. That whole process of intellectual engagement has taken a back seat to selling. So back to my own rant, which is the invasion of neoliberalism. I mean, I think that's what's happened. I mean, I've witnessed in the last 20 years that the editors have become much more interested in impact factors and having a relationship with the particular, they've allowed themselves to become nodes in a kind of cartel structure, which is what peer review is right now.
Yeah.
And indeed, they explicitly told me they could not publish some of my papers during the COVID era, saying, well, no, that we can't do that.
Why? What was their reason?
Because it was going to go against the religion of lockdowns.
The narrative, the narrative they were peddling.
That's appalling.
Exactly. Science got two people, Deepti Gurdaswamy and Devi Sridhar, to write an op-ed about herd immunity. I mean, this is really, really peculiar. And when we wrote in saying they've got it all wrong, they wouldn't even reply.
Yeah.
Good God.
So, I mean, that's really peculiar, because these are two people who do not have any kind of expertise in this area.
Oh, great. So it's got 2 people off the bus who said, here, boy, mate, do you want to write us something about, don't worry about it.
They were both professors or lecturers. Well, Devi Sunetra is obviously a professor of global health, but she doesn't have any training in epidemiology, let alone theoretical epidemiology.
Yeah.
And the other person was a lecturer in machine learning or something like that. So
machine learning.
I really don't know what was going on.
I mean, part of this is, and again, this is just something that I noticed during this whole thing is, call me naive, but my schoolboy idea of science is it's based on evidence. And it seemed like during the COVID pandemic, that ceased, and it was now about authority. I am the authority on this. I have been a professor for 20 years, and these other people, who are they? And it became all about authority and not to do with evidence.
And that's why it was made opaque, because actually, of course, most of the concepts that one needed to take on board were actually very easily accessible. We're not talking about string theory here. We're talking about how does an epidemic unfold? Does it reach an equilibrium state? These aren't things that, most people would, I think, be able to understand.
Of course they would.
These things.
I mean, equilibrium state, it means that your Ribena is the same color all over.
Exactly.
The entire glass. There you go. There is an equilibrium.
Not much is changing.
I understand.
How is that difficult? It's not difficult. It could easily have been explained. Yeah. But, they were also flip-flopping a lot, the experts. One day they'd say, we've got to go for herd immunity. The next day, oh no, that's the worst thing ever.
Shut everyone down.
Yes.
Oh, Sunetra, it's been absolutely a pleasure to have you on talking to us. I'm wearing a massive smile.
Will you come back and talk to us again? Because it's lovely to talk to people
here, and I've always, anytime.
Yeah, it's just nice to talk to someone who wants to actually discuss something openly rather than hit you over the head with their narrative.
Well, that's very kind of you, and as I said, I'll be very happy to be back anytime.
Yeah, and give us the updates on the vaccine. I hope that works. And next time I see you, I hope you'll be all in green, obviously.
See what you're wearing.
Sunetra, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks again for taking the time to listen.
If you enjoyed that, you can head over to Substack or YouTube.
Maybe leave a review. But also tell us what you think.
What you agreed with, what you disagreed with.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much.